I'm going to introduce our panel in just a moment. You know what this session is about, these 5 transformations. I'm going to start with a story, because storytelling is something that we all do as deans and directors, and we increasingly teach our students as well. I got to serve as acting dean at Berkeley's Business School in 2005, so it was a while back, and I had my first board meeting. And our board is much like your board, people with a lot more experience leading than I had. And one of those board members, I remember, her name was Margot Alexander, she said, "Don't forget, you are the chief purpose officer. So you get to see the faculty, you get to see the research, you get to see the students in the classrooms, you're in the magic all day long. You know, half of the people who work for and with you might spend half or more of their time processing travel reimbursements. And that's important to getting done what we get done. But part of your job is instilling a larger sense of purpose in the people around you." That transformation from purpose consumer, which we all are as human beings, to purpose creator, to being responsible for purpose, that was a click for me. I wish somebody had said that to me when I was 25. I was in my 40s, I'll never forget it. Not that I would have been good at it at 25, or not saying I'm good at it now, but somebody opened my eyes that that's part of what leaders need to do. And we often, naturally as people, we feed on the purpose of the institutions that we connect with. When does that click happen? When we start to see ourselves as responsible for purpose. All right, I start with that because that's one of the transformations that was on the list that I offered. We had great transformations from lots of people, from purpose consumer to purpose creator. And I'm going to introduce our panel. I think you all got the data. The data are valuable in what we wrote up. But I think this is one way to frame this session here. What are we most proud of? What are we as deans and directors most proud of? If students come in state A and they leave in state B, what are the 5 A to B transformations that you're most proud of? And those are going to be higher order takeaways. There are also going to be takeaways that none of us can say we deliver this big thing to all of our students, right? These are aspirational things. All right, let me start with Inese Okonedo, who is here from Lagos and is the dean of the Lagos Business School. Her background is, I mean, you have lots of bio information. I'm not going to walk you through all of it, but her background early as an academic is in accounting. She has moved her teaching more and more into things like problem solving and analytics and things in that direction. Inese is furthest to my left, all right? Bernard Young, NUS, National University of Singapore. Bernard as dean, he is actually, in terms of our backgrounds, he is the one that's most similar to me. He is an economist, a finance person, and for you to determine whether our backgrounds are influencing the way we talk about things. Luiz Brito is here from FGV in Brazil. He is the more kind of STEM-oriented background of all of us, and also lots of industry experience, chemical engineering and so forth. And we also have Peter Todd here from HEC in Paris. And Peter comes a little bit more from the IT background. Obviously, we've all been deans and for some time, but our backgrounds, I think, are relevant. So let's get us started. Just so you know, I mean, I know you all have a sense that there was this handout, which is a lot of data. And I just thought if you would like to refer to what each of these schools wrote, I think I'll move to Inese just initially, and you could talk a little bit about what you're thinking about and what you wrote at Lagos. The page 7, I realize that the pages aren't numbered, but if you flip to page 7, you will get,
Accounting is the first.
Accounting, you will get the Lagos Business School there. And so maybe, and I say, if you could kick us off, you know, the 5 that you wrote, how long would you say have they been sort of top of mind for LBS and you know, your own thinking on them? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Of the 5 that I wrote, I think there's about 2 or 3 that have always been top of mind for us at LBS. The first, which is about deepening the critical thinking and problem-solving abilities, have always been very critical for us right from the beginning of the school. For a number of reasons. I think that when we began, we knew that we had to match the world's top schools in terms of the knowledge of business and the practice of management. But then, as we quickly came to realize, what was being taught globally was not always applicable in our context as well. And I think that you'd agree with me that business education is contextual. Because of the peculiarities and the nuances of operating in a region such as Africa, we had to sort of sharpen the skills. So it wasn't enough for us to just say, this is what happens in financial management there. Other things have to come into consideration. Therefore, we had to find ways in which we could deepen the critical thinking and problem-solving abilities in the particular context, since the focus is on developing managers for Africa, first of all, and the world at large. The second, which also from the beginning we hoped to instill in the students and also to transform them, was the solid awareness of ethical practices. Again, also because of the region in which we operate there, in which, unfortunately, many times the abnormal had become normal. In the aftermath of the financial crisis, in which yesterday there was an allusion to business schools being the producers of people who were most involved in unethical practices. Indeed, we had started to ask ourselves that question as well. And at some point, one of the professors had actually conducted a research asking whether a business education is bad for the character of the individual. And in that respect, we knew that we had to instill in the students a deep awareness of ethical practices and to change the way they thought about things there. And you know, we have a very strong approach to dealing with that, which I'm happy to expand on later as well. Other things, other transformations came about as we went on in terms of developing the students, in terms of the social responsibility and instilling with them responsible leadership. That came afterwards as a consequence of what we wanted to do, who we wanted to produce for the nation as well. And the thing about responsible leadership, servant leadership, made us look at the curriculum and think, what was missing in this? What do we have to instill into this in order to transform the students? So those came later as well. So I would say the first 2, always there from the beginning. Others, as time went on, then we added those.
I mentioned this before, but when you have a new group of students in front of you and it's orientation, right, sort of day 1, do you mention some of these themes? And you probably don't, most of us may not use the word transformations, but is this part of your hour 1 talk?
Yes, yes, it is. I tell them what it is that we expect and what it is that we expect them to transform to. And always from the beginning, we mention about matching the world's top schools in terms of the knowledge and expertise. But then we also talk about the special emphasis that we put on responsible leadership, on ethics, as well as social responsibility. And for some of the students, some of them balk at it as though, don't we have it already? So we speak about, strengthening those things that they already have, or just bringing them to a deep awareness. So yes, it always features.
Thanks for that. One of the comments yesterday, I think it was Peter Tufano, talked about the attitudes and character part of what we deliver, and that we might deliver that quite differently across schools, or at least much more differently than the content knowledge itself, right? And I think that's an important point. Bernard, we'll go ahead and in sequence. Maybe you could talk a little bit about NUS, your list, how your thinking is moving in this direction. Thanks.
I'll make 3 points, Richard. The first one is that I'll talk about what we do. The second thing is explaining why we do that. The third one is about some sense of anxiety that I guess I have, and many of us do.
Sorry to interrupt, just real quickly. NUS is page 18, so that's.
I'll just read out the things, the transformations that we put down there. The first one is transforming their thinking. We want them to be analytical. We want them to be cautious of causal thinking and submit themselves to rigorous logic audits, robustness, and so on. The second one is about developing global mindset. I do not follow the orders I put down.
Good.
In the way that comes to my mind. Embrace diversity. That's the third one is develop entrepreneurship. The fourth one is to have confidence that they can make a difference. And the fifth one is about developing influence leadership. When I read all this, I find that we are all very similar. We say similar things. We do similar things. So in the sense of sharing, I would mention how we do it. At the outset in the orientation, we develop a camp called the leadership, influence communication leadership camp. We talk about the purpose of communication. We talk about anyone can be a leader. And that we set the tune for the next 17 months of their education. Then for all this thing, analytical thinking and so on, of course, we always do the traditional classroom thing. We always let them talk about cases, but we work very hard on making sure that academics will breach practice. Let me just illustrate something. We ask them, they must do a management practicum before they graduate. We ask them to handle things. For example, one of the things we ask them to handle is, there's pollution in Singapore. Solve this problem. The students pay out of their own pocket, fly to the island that burned the bushes, in the neighborhood country. They came back and they suggest something. I mean, we're economists. We all know what Coase theorem is about, right? They suggest that actually the Coase theorem breaks down because market failure, capital market failure, because if there is capital supply, they will not burn, they will not slash. But they go further than that. They turn it into a developmental problem. Said, why would people leave that kind of subsistence level of life and inhale this pollution all the time? This become a development question. And I'm really proud of our students bringing the Coase theorem, capital market theory, and development theory together to address a fundamental issue, pollution.
Yeah.
And then, just as another example, we gave them another project. How to save life in the emergency room. So they actually, at the beginning, the question was how I can get people through. They changed the question into how I save life. But they applied the business analytics and find out that it's not that. It is actually the congestion in the wards that keep people away from the emergency room. You go into the emergency room, after 2 hours, you pass on to the wards. But when the wards are congested, you cannot. And that is how we clog up and create the traffic jams, and people die out of that. And so this is how they bring analytics and real life, redefine the questions, and bring things back. And this is through this process. They find out that analytical thinking is important. They find out embracing diversity is important because they talk about this not just within the group, but to many people to come up with the answer.
Yep.
And then entrepreneurial, and out of all this, because their solutions adopted, they have a confidence that they can make a difference.
Yeah.
And now, why do we do all this? Am I taking too much time?
Not at all.
Okay. Why do we do all this? I beg us to ask our question. What do people need? In our education, there are 4 letters: knowledge, quality judgment. 2 letters, but I only use Q. The third one is skills, communication skills. The fourth one is value, KQSV. This balance of the 4 has been shifting over time. When Ted and I and you, when we were students, when I could do the derivative, when I can approximate the derivative.
I love that. That's
oh,
great.
yeah. Isn't it, right? And someone won the Nobel Prize for that. And someone made huge amount of money out of that. But nowadays, you go to the internet, you find them.
Yeah.
Better yet, you hire physicists and they do it faster for you, right? So knowledge, the importance of knowledge has shifted. And yet, you just talk about attitude and so on. Value has gone up.
Yeah, can you say more about that word, the way you're using value?
Have a sense of purpose, that you can make a difference.
Okay.
You do the right thing.
Okay.
Okay. You do things not for yourself,
Okay.
but really for a sense of purpose.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. And that developed into a community with a sense of purpose. And then about this Q is quality judgment. When we think about the case studies, we're trying to inculcate onto them ability to make judgment. Yeah. Skills, we all know that when you can connect the dots, but you cannot move the team, you cannot communicate, forget it. Yeah. So this K, Q, S, V has shifted gradually towards the V part and reduced the K part because of the thing.
Yeah, and industry-wide, right?
Exactly.
I mean, right?
So this is what, I read all this thing, I find out that we're all following this model.
Yeah.
Then one more thing we need to think about is that yesterday I listened to the panel and so on. I think, look, I don't want to think of us as doing business. We are not. Any organization, any network will survive if it serves a good purpose. What is that purpose? Fundamentally, it's about developing knowledge and leaders. But what kind? Then I have to think about what is going on in this world. Ted, in yesterday's opening remark and in the forum, he talked about a lot of changes in the world. I agree with him.
Yeah.
There is a shifting of political and economic power, east, west, and so on. It creates a huge amount of anxiety, don't you think? The shifting creates anxiety because life is not what we used it to be. Second, all the technology create a lot of challenges. The information flow is global and speedy. If you don't believe in it, check what happened to UA. Okay, the video thing and so on. All this technology has changed the work model, the business model. Uberization, platform economy, etc., etc. Two things are important in this technological change. One, speed of change. Second, it changed the distribution of gain and loss. We talk about winners take all. The gain is more concentrated, the loss is more diffused. Yeah. So do we, and it's not just the students, but faculty members, do we as an industry, think about what knowledge we produce that will allow us to face the anxiety, reduce the tension. What kind of leaders that we can produce that allow us to really deal with the tension, actually take advantage of the tension and make life better. So this is the kind of thing that I think is more than just about the transformation. I feel we ourselves have to transform.
I agree. So I think you're making an important point, and to what end? To what end these transformations, right? Are these transformations that make us feel good? I started by saying, what are you most proud of? But if we're proud of them and they aren't serving what society needs from our institutions, that's a misalignment, right? And as we think about, one could take that particular lens. Let's use technology and the both positive and disruptive elements of technology. And then reread this list of transformations and ask, how many of these are really addressing that question? Or socioeconomic diversity, income inequality, these sorts of questions as well. Anyway, so I'm glad you anchored on the ends. Please, Luis, some thoughts on FGV, well, how you see it.
Thank you very much for being here, my colleagues. It's really a pleasure. I was thinking one of the points that maybe need to reflect, each student goes to an individual path of transformation. So it's very difficult to say that each school's changes all the students in one way or another, right? Yeah. So each
We are on
student
page
evolves
20,
in its
page
own
20.
in its own way.
Yes.
And our attempt to identify 5 transformations is an attempt to reduce reality to. But thinking about what we wrote and we reflected on that, I think I would group the transformations we stated in two major themes. One relates to knowledge and the other to relationships. So in terms of knowledge, we listed 2 transformations, the first and the last. The first relates to the strategic aspect of knowledge, of finding relationships between different functions of businesses, seeing the forest instead of only seeing the trees, and making connections. So to develop that, we need to go beyond the functional teaching of accounting, operations, marketing, and encourage the student to think between these functions. And I think this is something that really happens, and most of our students come out at a different level of relationship between subjects. The other aspect of knowledge is what we are talking today, that today we can find almost everything on the net. If you need to solve an equation or solve a problem, you will find that information. But you need a basic knowledge to navigate along those huge sources of information, to identify what's really valuable, what you can rely on, how to judge. So I think in terms of transformation, the student at the end of the program has a better understanding of how to keep learning afterwards and how to judge the different sources of information and knowledge that he will acquire through life. So these are 2 knowledge dimensions that we tried to summarize in the first and last transformations. The ones that deal with relationships, there are 3 levels of relationships. The first is the relationship with yourself. I think each of the students going through a program leaves our school at a deeper level of reflection of what he or she is doing with her life and the purpose thing that appeared in many aspects. So that's one transformation. I think you think about yourself differently after experiencing the period within the school. Then the second level is the relationship with others, with the colleagues, how you collaborate, how you work with the other colleagues. And as is the case with most schools here, we target a very selective group of students. So the students, usually when they come, they've experienced in life a leadership position before that. So they used to be leaders, the top of the class, the stars in their companies. And then they come to a school where they will be in a class of 30 or 40 students. They have a similar history. They're all stars. So suddenly they need to relate to those people at a different level, a level they were not usually exposed before. And they need to learn how to develop those relationships and work together. And the third aspect of relationships links very much with what the Genome network is, the connection with the world. I think the school and its connections offer a wide range of opportunities to see other institutions, other places, other cultures, and then you enhance your understanding that you're not alone in the world and there's a whole universe around you that you can, that you need to develop your relationships.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. You know, I think the idea of, many of us are modelers, right? The idea that those 5 might fit naturally into knowledge plus relationships, which fits with some of the models we talked about yesterday, right? Content knowledge, that's a very large category, right? I think part of what you're saying is that there's content knowledge, do you know what net present value is? And then there's content knowledge that helps you sort of connect across boundaries and things along those lines. And then relationships, whether that's networks or the soft skills that we talked about, we're seeing lots of similarities there. Now, one quick question: do you use the word transformation when you talk to students at orientation? I presume you cover some of this material at orientation.
Yeah, we cover some, but we don't specifically target them. But you need to be transformed this way or that way. We show So you have a wonderful experience here.
Yeah.
You will come out different from where you are today.
Yeah.
And these are all the opportunities and paths that are available to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think, one other thing that's a theme that's, I think, across all of our schools and many of the schools is this idea of, what is your purpose? What are your core values? What are your non-negotiables? We don't want you to get to the other side of this program without having thought about that. We're in no position to tell you what your non-negotiable values should be necessarily, but we're not going to let you out until you've thought hard about that. And that's something that the outside world, for example, the world that is, maybe it's a minority, but the world that thinks that business education sometimes distorts. You use the idea that, are you subtracting value from business schools, right? That's kind of the hardcore skeptic. But the idea that we all go through that exercise, that we are graduating people that have gone through that exercise of what are my personal core values and how am I going to live by them, the world doesn't know that we do that. That's one of the things many people in the world don't know that. That's an important value added there. So we're going to turn to page. I'm going to start with the page this time rather than interrupt. We are now at HEC, France, in Paris, and we are on page 8. Peter, any thoughts?
All right. Well, I have to have a thought or two, but it's a tough act to follow. Maybe stepping back one half step from this, thinking for me with our students about the difference between transformation, which is kind of a lofty notion that we're changing them somehow, and transition, which is maybe a more instrumental kind of practical notion as well. And I think for our younger students, and one of the reasons we're, aside from the fact we're French and everything has to be long and complicated, one of the reasons we presented you not 5 transformations but 10, was that we thought about this from the perspective of our 2 biggest streams of programs, which is our pre-experience programs for students who look more like undergraduate students and don't have business experience, and then our experienced students. And I think with our pre-experience students, we can think more about transformation. And I think with our MBA students, and certainly with our executive MBA students, we're really thinking about transition. We're thinking about how they're moving from one step to another step. And that kind of framed a little bit our way of thinking about these things. Also, for me, in reflecting back on it, was shaped by, I think we are all shaped by these different stories or interactions that come to us at different times. Some years ago, and I don't know how long ago it was now, I was sitting in a prior job with a CEO of a major industrial company. We were just talking about evolution of careers and what did you want to know and what was important to you to know. And he was an engineer, came from an engineering background, had done an MBA and so on. And he sort of said, when I started, what was important to me was how to calculate things. It was all this analytical knowledge. He was old enough, I think, to even say it was my slide rule, and it was my calculator, and then it was my spreadsheet, and so on. And as I moved forward, in my career, suddenly it was all this interpersonal knowledge, and it was all this humanistic knowledge, and it was all this how to relate to people. And wishing that I'd studied these different things at different moments to frame the advancement of my career. And he says, when I rose to the top, I said, I moved from, saying I was really delighted to be an engineer, and then I wished I was, a human resource major. And when he moved to the top, he said, I wish I'd studied political science. And all of life was about relating to the outside world, and particularly to the regulation, to governance, and to all of these things. And some of these things we need to do in our programs, I think, are to manage these phased transitions that students go through as they become leaders, as they develop. And so for us, just to reflect quickly, when we talk about the pre-experienced students, part of it is just helping them to figure out who they are and what they want to do, to help them to uncover passions, to help them to be aware of themselves, and then hopefully to help them be aware of themselves in the context of a community and a society, and to instill that sense of values that they need to have, and to recognize increasingly that they operate in a global environment. And that's core to, I think, for all of us here in the global network, core to our way of thinking about things is that you need to interact across cultures, across languages, across different environments. And to make sure that that's embedded, that these students develop a sense of solution also through creativity, through being entrepreneurial, and through putting themselves forward. And part of that involves developing a proclivity for risk, I think, as well. And that's something that maybe is a little bit culturally determined, but in different places, your orientation towards risk. I always think that when I'm in the United States, if I fall down and my business doesn't work, I pick myself up, I brush myself off, and I carry on. And if I'm in France and my business doesn't work, c'est une catastrophe. Oh mon Dieu, life is over. And you have to think about how to change or adapt people, I think, in those situations to open up. And increasingly that means thinking across boundaries, across disciplines, and so on. And then, just very quickly as we move into the experience model, I mean, we're transitioning, right? We're bringing in people, and maybe if I think about a pre-experience student, we're starting from who are they and trying to transform them in some ways. I think with the experienced students, I think we start from where do you want to be? You've come here presumably with some notion that you're transitioning, that you're moving from one thing to another. And there, we see our students basically coming in to do career transitions. And we want to be very practical about that. And those career transitions are often around job, they're often around sector, and they're often around geography. And so, we look through that set of things and try to understand, if 2/3 of our students, and it's a little more than that, are going to make at least 2 of those 3 transitions, and about 1/3 of them are making 3 of those 3 transitions between their entry into our MBA program and their exit, what do we need to do to help them move along? And so that's where, obviously, the transition from an individual contributor to a leader is something that we hope we're laying some of the fundamentals for. That transition from thinking about your career to thinking about your career in the context of a community, I think something that's important to us. Thinking about, a la my CEO example, what's your lifelong trajectory, and what does that mean for your need to develop lifelong capacity to learn as well, and to lay in place those fundamentals. And to think about the way that, yes, you're going to get a broad education, but you're also going to have some deep expertise in something. And one of the twists I think we put on that at HEC, and I think it comes from our roots as the business schools in France dominantly have come out of the chambers of commerce in France. And I think that's driven this sense of kind of practicality that's driven a learning by doing kind of model to education. But it's also driven us into this model where we, in the development of students, step beyond to the accounting, the finance, the marketing, to drive students into sectors as well, and try to get them to understand in some depth a particular sector.
Yeah. Look, there are a lot of themes in all of these comments. Thanks for that round. I think you mentioned proclivity for risk. It's just one thing that popped out for me, right? I mean, that, are the students that we are, perhaps without meaning to, admitting to our schools,